The auctioneer brought the gavel down at $235 on a cool, clear November morning in 2006 at the Yakima Valley National Bank foreclosure auction outside Yakima, Washington. And the man in the charcoal gray three-piece pinstripe suit standing at the side of the auction tent let out a thin, clipped laugh through his teeth that turned the heads of every Yakima Valley orchard truck mechanic standing along the chain link. Holcomb West Gate was 54, 6'1", and slim as a survey rod. His thinning fair brown hair combed straight back from a high tanned forehead and held with pomade, a thin, clean-shaven jaw, sharp pale gray eyes behind small round gold-rimmed spectacles balanced on the bridge of his nose, a pale Yakima Valley desk tan. He wore a charcoal gray three-piece pinstripe wool suit over a crisp white French cuff dress shirt with small gold cufflinks engraved with the letter H, a wine-red regimental striped silk tie, polished black leather wingtip shoes, and a small enameled Yakima Valley National Bank lapel pin on the left lapel. A heavy gold signet ring sat on his left pinky, and a slim oxblood leather portfolio sat tucked under his left arm. He had been Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending at Yakima Valley National Bank for 15 years, and the foreclosure auction had been called for the back lot of the bank's cellar branch to clear equipment the bank had taken from a Yakima Valley orchard recovery contractor's estate after a 1990 lien default. The 1953 International Harvester R-19 Wrecker at the back of the auction list had been on the bank's books since 1991, and Holcomb had told the auctioneer privately the bank would have written the truck off the salvage ledger for $100 as a total loss. The 24-year-old shop mechanic at the back of the bidder's line in the deeply faded canvas chore coat had just outbid the bank for $235 against Holcomb's casual $50 opening shot, and Holcomb was making sure the Yakima Valley orchard hands understood the joke. Tate Lindgren folded the auction slip into the inside pocket of his chore coat and walked through the cold gravel to the truck. The IHR 190 was 21 feet of long-nose conventional cab medium-duty iron, with the early 1950s IH waterfall grille and a chrome IH crown emblem on the front of the long hood. The cab painted a faded apple orchard red, oxidized to a chalky brick rose along the body panels and bone white along the upper edges of the doors and roof from 16 Yakima Valley summers. The chrome international script badge across the front of the long hood tarnished both round chrome side cab mirrors, snapped off at the brackets. The original Holmes 480 Wrecker boom with a hand-cranked single-drum winch mounted on the rear deck listing 2 degrees right with a frayed cable. The wooden cargo deck planks rotted, 3 of the 6 tires flat, and the word junk spray-painted in flaking orchard blossom pink block letters across the driver's door. Tate had grown up on a heirloom apple orchard 4 miles north of the truck's last parking spot. His grandfather, Erland Lindgren, was waiting at the trailer. Erland was 78, a retired Yakima Valley Tree Fruit Cooperative orchard truck mechanic who had worked the Sella co-op shops for 41 years between 1948 and his retirement in 1989. 5'10", lean and erect, with broad, bony shoulders and a slight stoop. Snow-white hair clipped close under a faded denim newsboy cap, pulled low, a thick white mustache trimmed close, deep, watery hazel eyes set in a Yakima Valley sun-weathered face, large knotted hands. A short-stemmed briar pipe sat unlit between his teeth. He wore a faded indigo canvas chore coat, unbuttoned over a faded barn-red heavy cotton workshirt buttoned to the throat. Faded dark blue dungarees held up with thick brown leather suspenders, scuffed brown leather lace-up orchard boots, and a plain dark brown leather belt with a worn brass buckle stamped with a small apple blossom silhouette. Erland set one liver-spotted hand on the rusted bumper of the R-19, and stood there a long minute. He spoke quietly. He said, "Son, you bought Burl Ostvik's old R-190. Burl Ostvik had run Ostvik Valley Recovery out of a small board and batten shop on Natchez Highway, outside Natchez, Washington, from 1972 until the rollover, working the steep Ottenham Ridge orchard switchbacks and the muddy spring sap haul roads above Sella, pulling stuck Yakima Valley Tree Fruit Co-op orchard trucks off the back grades and overturned cherry haulers out of the wet November switchbacks above the Yakima River. He had built the Holmes 480 wrecker boom himself onto the R-190's rear deck in 1976, with the help of two welders from the Sella Co-op shop on a long Veterans Day weekend. He had married a Sella girl named Marit Renner in 1981, and they had a daughter, Ingrid, born in 1983. Burl had died in November of 1990. He had been working an orchard truck recovery on the steep Ottenham Ridge switchback above Natchez in a wet November sleet when his own R-190 caught a thin glaze of ice on the unprotected outside shoulder and slid over the edge and rolled twice down a 60-foot orchard slope. He had died at the scene of a broken neck. He was 41. Ingrid was 7. The R-190 had been recovered up out of the orchard slope by another wrecker out of Ellensburg and parked behind the Ostvik shop on Natchez Highway. Marit had paid the Yakima County property tax on the shop and the truck for 1 year, until the bank's 1991 lien default and Yakima Valley National Bank had taken the property and the inventory through Holcomb Westgate's commercial lending desk. The R-190 had sat in the back of the bank's Sella branch lot for 15 more years until the foreclosure auction. Tate had been at the auction because his grandfather had heard from a Sella Co-op retiree that Burl Ostvik's truck was finally being sold. They winched the R-190 onto Tate's borrowed flatbed trailer. Holcomb Westgate stood at the side of the auction tent in his charcoal pinstripe wool suit and watched, the slim oxblood leather portfolio still tucked under his left arm, and as Tate pulled out, he called across the gravel that when the boy was ready to admit defeat, Yakima Valley National Bank would arrange disposal for $100 cash. Tate did not answer. Erland climbed into the cab of the trailer truck, and they drove the 9 miles north up US 97 to Erland's red cedar pole barn shop behind a small white-frame farmhouse on a heirloom apple orchard ridge outside Natchez, the dead R-19 rocking behind them on the dry pavement, the Holmes 480 boom pointing at the cool gray November Washington sky like a bent finger. The restoration would take 18 years. Nobody knew that on the drive north. Tate worked his day job at a heavy truck shop in Sella during the week and drove 15 minutes north on US 97 to Erland's pole barn every Saturday and most Sundays. They started with a cab dash because Erland insisted. The IHR 190 cab dashboard had taken the brunt of the rollover, and the heater box mounted behind the dash had been bent inward by the impact. They removed the original dash for inspection and set it on the bench. They pulled the IHBD 269 inline-six gasoline engine out of the truck and tore it down on a stand. The bearings were salvageable, the crank true, the head needed a careful regrind. They pulled the 5-speed manual and pressed new bushings into the shift tower. The first long Washington winter went into the engine and into stories about Burl Ostvik. Erland told Tate about the night in 1979 when Burl pulled a stuck Yakima Valley cherry truck out of an Atenum Ridge switchback at -4 degrees and refused payment except for a bushel of Esopus Spitzenberg heirloom apples. He told Tate about the morning in 1984 when Burl hauled a snapped Caterpillar D8 dozer out of a Natchez riverbank above Sella and let the contractor pay him in 2 cords of seasoned applewood for his smokehouse. He told stories about Marit Ostvik's apple butter cake. The second year, they sand-blasted the rollover rusted frame down to clean steel. By the 5th year, the cab came off. In the 7th year, Erland slowed. He had a small heart attack in March and was at the Yakima Memorial Hospital for 9 days. He came home thinner and quieter, but his hands still worked. He told Tate the truck would wait. By the 9th year, the R190 was a roller. In the 11th year, Tate's daughter was born, and the work paused for a month. By the 14th year, Erland sat more than he stood. He worked from a folding wooden chair beside the pole barn wood stove. The faded denim newsboy cap pulled low, the short-stem briar pipe between his teeth, pointing at what to do next. Through all those years, Holcomb Westgate drove past the foot of Erland's gravel drive on US 97 sometimes in his polished black Mercedes E-Class, with the Yakima Valley National Bank parking decal on the windshield, the slim oxblood leather portfolio visible on the passenger seat through the side window. The Mercedes always slowed at the bottom of the drive, but never quite turned in. By the 15th year, the R190 was painted. They had wet sanded and primed and laid down a deep, glossy apple orchard red that matched a faded snapshot Erland had of the truck from 1977, and they had masked off the driver's door with blue painter's tape around a rectangle where the flaking orchard blossom pink junk paint still showed through, and they had left it there. Tate did not know why. He just left it. By the 17th year, the Holmes 480 boom was rebuilt with a fresh aircraft-grade single-drum cable. By the 18th year, the R190 was nearly whole. They had not yet pulled the original heater box from behind the restored dash for fresh heater hoses and a core inspection. The heater box was the last thing on the list because Erland always said you start with what makes the truck move and you finish with what keeps her cab warm in a Cascades blizzard. On a cool, clear morning of November, the 10th of the 18th year, Tate pulled into Erland's pole barn with a fresh set of heater hoses and a half-inch socket. He was 42. The brown at his temples had gone steady silver. The small white scar across his right knuckle from a creeperjack handle in 2014 was a faint line, and his hands had the thickness of a man who had spent half his life under hoods. Erland was 96. He sat on his folding wooden chair beside the pole barn wood stove with a heavy plaid wool blanket over his knees, the faded denim newsboy cap pulled low, the short-stem briar pipe between his teeth. Tate climbed into the R190 cab and unbolted the original heater box from the inside of the dash. He lifted the box out and set it on the workbench. He started to unbolt the heater core cover for the new hoses, and he stopped. There was a small hand-welded steel pocket arc-welded to the inside of the heater box shell above where the heater core seated. the weld bead hand-applied. Tate set down the socket. He took a thin, cold chisel and a small ball-peen hammer and gently cracked the weld around the small pocket. The pocket came free in his hand. He carried the pocket to the workbench under the clip-on lamp and slit the soldered seam with a heated putty knife and lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in 2 layers of waxed canvas bound with brown twine, were 4 things. There was a tight roll of folded $20 bills wrapped with a piece of brown twine, 75 bills in 1980s Federal Reserve paper, totaling $1,500. There was a small brass charter member's badge with a small enameled apple blossom and mountain emblem in the center, and the engraved words Washington State Apple Growers Association /charter member /1933 around the brass face above 3 small initials. There was a small black and white photograph mounted on stiff paperboard showing a small girl of about 3 in a pale cotton sundress sitting on a Yakima Apple Festival picnic table with a half-eaten Red Delicious in her hand, the date October 1986 written on the back in pencil. And there was a folded single sheet of plain yellowed lined paper, the creases brittle, the ink faded, but legible. Tate unfolded it. The handwriting was small and careful and slanted slightly to the right. The letter was dated November the 4th of 1990. It read, "To my Ingrid, the cash is for whatever a young woman needs at 18 when the Yakima Valley cannot hold her. The badge is your grandfather Halvar's. He was a 1933 charter member of the Washington State Apple Growers Association out of Natchez, and he wore that badge on his orchard apron every harvest from 1933 until he retired in 1968 and gave it to me on my 18th birthday in 1967. The photograph is of you the morning your grandfather walked you down to the Yakima Apple Festival to taste the first Red Delicious of the harvest. I am welding this pocket inside the heater box because the Autumn Ridge switchback ice has been heavy for 3 Novembers running, and I do not want anything lost if the outside shoulder gives way on the next orchard truck call. The truck is yours when you are old enough to drive her without breaking her. Your father, Burl Halvar Ostvik, Natchez, Washington, November 4th, 1990. Tate sat on the workbench. He read the letter twice. He handed it to his grandfather, and Erland held it in both hands and read it once and set it down. He said quietly, "Burl wrote this 6 days before the outside shoulder gave way on Autumn Ridge." The girl never knew. They drove south to Yakima the next Saturday. Erland had called a Sela co-op retiree whose niece kept the Yakima heirloom apple grower's office, and the niece had given them a current address for Ingrid Ostvik Renner on a small heirloom apple orchard outside Natchez. They drove south on US 97 under a clear, cool November Washington morning, past long rows of bare apple trees, and parked in front of a small clapboard farm office with a hand-painted wooden sign above the door reading Ostvik Renner Heirloom Orchard. The woman who came out of the office in a faded canvas orchard apron was 41. She had Burl Ostvik's broad shoulders and her father's deep hazel eyes. She wore a faded khaki canvas orchard apron with 2 front pockets over a faded indigo cotton workshirt, faded dark blue dungarees, scuffed brown leather lace-up orchard boots, a small silver apple blossom pendant on a thin silver chain at her throat, and a thin gold wedding band on her left ring finger. Erland spoke first. He said, "Ma'am, I knew your father. He worked on his R190 in my pole barn in 1984. My grandson here bought the International at the Yakima Valley National Bank foreclosure auction over in Sella 18 years ago, and we have been restoring her ever since. And we found something welded inside her heater box that belongs to you." Ingrid's face changed. She brought them into a small farm office kitchen, and they sat at a round oak table, and Tate set the 4 items down, one at a time. The cash first, then the brass badge, then the photograph. He saved the letter for last. Ingrid picked up the brass charter member's badge. She turned it slowly between her fingers and read the engraving around the brass face. She said her grandfather Halvar had been a 1933 charter member of the Washington State Apple Growers Association out of Natchez, that the family had been told the badge had been sold to a Wenatchee antique dealer in 1970 after Halvar died, and that she had been looking through Yakima Valley estate sales for 30 years for that badge. She picked up the photograph. She held it for a long time. She read the letter twice. She did not cry until the second reading. She asked finally if she could see the truck. They drove her north to Erland's pole barn the next morning. Ingrid walked slowly around the R190 3 times in the open bay. She ran her hand along the chrome IH crown emblem on the front of the long hood and the early 1950s waterfall grill. She stood at the driver's door, where the flaking orchard blossom pink junk was still masked off in blue tape. She turned to Tate and asked the price. Tate looked at his grandfather. Erland laid both hands on his knees and said, "Ma'am, the truck is yours, but not the way you mean. We are going to finish her. We are going to paint over the door so the junk is gone, and then we are going to drive her down US 97 to Natchez Highway and park her at the empty board and batten lot where Ostvik Valley Recovery stood until November of 1990. And we are going to paint your father's name on the door in clean white, the way he had it in 1972. The boy paid $235 at auction. The truck is his on the paper. The work is his by the doing. But the name on the door belongs to your father and your grandfather and you. They finished the R190 through that winter. Ingrid drove up from her orchard every other Sunday. On the morning of April the 21st of the 19th year, they rolled the R190 out of Erland's pole barn under a clear blue Washington sky and drove her in convoy south on US 97 to Natchez Highway and parked her facing the empty board and batten lot where Ostvik Valley Recovery had stood until November of 1990. Tate handed Ingrid a small can of deep apple red paint and a 1-inch brush. Ingrid climbed up on the running board and painted out the flaking orchard blossom pink junk on the driver's door. She waited an hour. She opened a can of clean white lettering paint, and in her father's careful slant, she painted across the door in clean, clear letters. Ostvik Valley Recovery, established 1972, old enough to drive her without breaking her. She stepped down. A polished black Mercedes E-Class went by on Natchez Highway. Holcomb Westgate was driving. He slowed almost to a stop. He looked at the R190 at the empty board and batten lot with the apple red door and the clean white lettering. He looked at the 4 people on the gravel. He did not laugh. He drove on. The R190 sits on Natchez Highway outside Natchez today, and the sign on the door reads, Ostvik Valley Recovery established 1972. Ingrid runs the heirloom apple orchard outside Natchez. The $1,500 sits in a small lockbox at her farm office. The 1933 Washington State Apple Growers Charter Badge sits beside it. The 1986 Yakima Apple Festival photograph is framed above her kitchen table. The letter is in a small fireproof safe in her closet. She reads it once a year on the 4th of November. If you ever see an old IHR 190 parked along Natchez Highway outside Natchez with the words Ostvik Valley Recovery painted on the door in clean white, slow down, roll the window down, and listen. There is a story in that truck that a bank vice president in a charcoal pinstripe suit would have written off the salvage ledger for $100, and the work was always for the daughter. Subscribe to Iron Hook Stories for a new story every day. Thank you for watching.